Next, it's back home for another midweek outing, where we will play host to Burnley. Kick-off on Wednesday is 6 p.m, with coverage on one or other of the BT channels, so you'll probably be sat there with your dinner. Burnley have lost just the once since the restart, a 5-0 reverse at Manchester City. This was followed by a brace of 1-0 wins at home to Watford and away at Palace. At the weekend, they drew 1-1 at home with Sheffield United, which, at the time of recording this, leaves them in 9th place on 46 points, which is a point clear of Spurs, who, at the time of writing, have a game in hand. So, all is sweetness and light at Turf Moor then? No, not exactly. The shift of the closing part of the season deep into summer has messed up the timing of contracts, most of which expire on the 30th of June in any particular year. This has resulted in clubs desperately getting players to sign short-term extensions so that they can finish the season, which is fine if the player wants to stay. Less so if, as we found with Ngakia, he doesn't. Thus it was that Burnley, already possessing one of the smaller squads in the top flight, found themselves shorn of 3 players. Whilst it may be a moot point as to how many appearances Joe Hart or Aaron Lennon may have gone on to make, the departure of Irish midfielder Jeff Hendrick will have had a larger effect, the player having started 22 of their last 29 matches. The reduction in available resources has not been helped by injuries, and, for the first few games after the restart, they felt unable to avail themselves of the new rule that enables you to scatter 9 substitutes around the stadium. Indeed, the bench for their opener against Manchester City contained only 7 players, and 2 of those were goalkeepers. Sean Throat Pastel Dyche may not have been deliberately going out of his way to make a point, but the lack of resources must surely have been discussed at board level. Daisy, the socially bubbled personal assistant with a beautiful smile, tells me that they didn't do too much in the way of squad augmentation during the January window. They did bring in one player in the form of Bristol City midfielder Josh Brownhill, who cost the Burnley Exchequer £9 million 6 months ago. Brownhill is likely to get more game time earlier than anticipated in the absence of Jack, my middle name is Porteous, Cork, whose ankle injury will require surgery, which is likely to bring his season to a premature close. Well, maybe not premature as such, but, well, you know what I mean. They were more quiet bench-wise at the weekend as they drew 1-1 with Sheffield United. The starting 11 included veteran Scots defender Phil Bardsley, who had joined the unavailable for selection gang in the early days of the return. However, he managed to come to an agreement with the board and nabbed himself a 12-month deal to give Dyche another defensive option, one that was much needed in view of the foot injury picked up by Matt Lowton, which appears to be far more serious than had first been anticipated. Up front, the senior partner has been Jay Rodriguez. 16 of his 31 league appearances this season have come from the bench. However, he has been given more start time in recent weeks when he's been fit, in the absence of wannabe Austrian Ashley Barnes, whose pelvis will rule him out for Wednesday. Rodriguez was partnered by Matt Vidra at the weekend, the Czech international missing a sitter that might have given the Clarets all 3 points. Vidra was replaced by top scorer Chris Wood, with 20 minutes left to play at the weekend, and Wood may be the more likely starter for Wednesday night. In addition to Barnes, Cork and Lowton, they will also be without skipper Ben Mee, who has a thigh strain that is proving somewhat bothersome. One possible replacement might have been Ben Gibson. However, there appears to have been an outbreak of irreconcilable differences between player and club. Earlier on, it was believed that he was allowed to have gone to Borough to train, though that arrangement seems to have come to an end. But for his falling out with Dyche, one would have thought he might have been an obvious selection, given that they're now down to Tarkowski and Long as the only 2 fit central defenders in the squad. However, it would be a major surprise, on a par with Mike Dean having an honest 90 minutes, if Gibson were to turn up on Wednesday. Talking of Dean, we saw yet more examples of the disastrous VAR experiment in the wild and wacky world of association football this weekend. I didn't hold much hope when VAR was introduced. The one thing I thought might happen was the fervent hope that the system might curtail the excesses of the likes of Dean, whose willfully perverse match-altering decisions must by now run into the high thousands. What happened at the weekend? We had VAR exposing a decision as incorrect, then failing to overturn it. The whole thing's a farce, and as mentioned the other day, PJMOL is now reduced to having to lie just to keep their noses in the trough. Elsewhere, the BBC's love affair with the second best team in the country continues, with PGMOL Liverpool tedious outing against Villa somehow being promoted to opening slot on Match of the Day, despite being devoid of any redeeming merit. It was kind of like binge watching every single episode of the funny as an attack of gout sitcom Bread, in the vain hope of something amusing happening, then being told how hilarious it all was despite all the evidence to the contrary. Give it a year or two more of Klopp and Auntie will be promoting the long ball game as being far better than 1970s Brazil. You can see the pundits now telling you how much better the famous Carlos Alberto goal would have been had only Brazil thumped it forward from the back in the hope of someone getting on the end of it. And so to us. Well, things have come on splendidly over the last 10 days or so. The Chelsea win did so much for team morale that the good vibes spilled over into the Newcastle game. I can't remember the last time we scored so early in a match. And, apart from the 10 minutes either side of their equaliser, we looked fairly comfortable against a side fresh from a 4-goal walloping of, admittedly, Bournemouth. It is notable that we're all feeling a little bit cheesed off at the drop of 2 points when, this time last week, we might well have snatched your proverbial arm off for the 4th point out of 6 in a week. That chap Souček is looking to be a find. Assuming we stay up, I understand there's an obligation on our part to make the deal permanent. I know we've had issues with the Haller finances, but seriously, if we lose out on the player at the end of the season because somebody decides to try and delay a payment, there will be hell to pay. Talking of Haller, whilst I accept that he's injured, I'm not daft enough to accept that the delayed payment had nothing to do with cash flow, as official sources seemed keen to suggest to us. It just seems far too convenient that whatever the contractual issue was that we had with Eintracht, it was too commercially sensitive to discuss. Haller has been training, apparently, but at the time of writing, he's rated as having no more than a 25% chance of making an appearance, as does Anderson, who was injured in the warm-up against Chelsea. The one definite absentee will be Snodgrass, whose back problem is a bit of a nasty one. Assuming all are well, my temptation would be to adopt the if it ain't broke selection maxim and go with an unchanged starting 11. The lack of attacking options from the bench is still a concern, to be sure, but if, as was the case up at Newcastle, we go out on the front foot, maybe it'll just be our opponents that will have to chase the game for once. So let's move on to the prediction. I know Burnley have a reputation for being hard to beat. However, that injury list, whilst not as lengthy as some, does include some players who are very important to what is, as I've said, one of the smaller squads in the league. I know we're playing twice a week, and there's no concern shown by the authorities for preview writers, but the restorative effect of a win at a decent point will go a long way to charging the batteries against a side with depleted resources who, despite the lateness of the equaliser at the weekend, were outplayed for large periods. So, with the sun shining, at least for the time being, I shall go all optimistic and hope that the officials allow us a home win. So, Mr. Winston, when you've stopped serving Mike Dean, please place the £2.50 that would have gone on buying Mr. Howlett a decent stream for his computer. As far as he's concerned, it's just gone half-time at St James's Park. And place the lot on a 2-1 win for us. Enjoy the game.